Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Daily Crypto Byte. Today is Wednesday, April 13th. We've got the markets trying to move in the right direction here today. Bitcoin leading the charge, heading up to some critical resistance levels. So we'll discuss that as well as a whole lot more. But before we get started, CJ, how are you doing today, my friend?
Doing well, Monty. Good to be back as always. And a lot of interesting stuff to discuss as well with not only the NASDAQ, but also S&P, I believe, reaching that TD by 9 yesterday as well as today. So excited to look into that. DXY and oil, both above 100 still and continuing to look strong. So we're going to go into those and discuss them as well. But interesting to see Bitcoin back above 40K. Any initial thoughts on this morning's price action?
Yeah, I mean, I was just sitting there watching the, hourly chart, and Bitcoin's last hourly candle, it really formed in kind of the, last 20 minutes of that hour and really showed some signs of positive price action. So we were looking a bit indecisive this morning. The Qs were kind of opening flat. But as soon as we started to move in the right direction, Bitcoin really took off. It seems like people are kind of waiting for, the runway to clear. They're waiting for the Qs to turn positive to bring back that risk appetite, because as soon as we saw the Qs start to trend positive this morning, Bitcoin made a really nice move to the upside, as well as many alts. So, yeah, lots to discuss today. Plenty of alts to take a look at as well. So let's jump into it.
I feel like that's a good place to start. It's just the SPX as well as some of the stock indices, and then we can kind of filter downstream into BTC rates and alts, of course. Kava is an interesting one. We had a question about that I want to talk about. It could be an interesting hidden gem between Cosmos and Ethereum and their work that they've been doing there. But without further ado, let's take a look at some of these charts. So starting here with the SPX, something that we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks, even throughout this pretty violent downtrend that we've had, is the potential of this entire pattern to ultimately act as an inverse head and shoulders if we are to find support roughly at the 4,400 level, which is where we stand right now. I think one thing that you can look at from a technical perspective that I think a lot of folks have not really placed enough importance on. I think that's this massive bullish divergence that we've been seeing throughout the entirety of this actual inverse head and shoulders pattern. The reason why it is a very interesting divergence, even though we do have somewhat of a higher high, is that when you look at the SPX, you will see something similar with the Nasdaq as well. But we have a lower low. Yet we have two consecutive higher lows. And while this one is a little bit higher, I'll show you on the other indice. This is a very characteristic of a lot of inverse head and shoulders patterns when you had consistent higher lows, and it kind of shows that the bearish momentum is really been kind of taken out of the market, at least in the short term. Also, you combine that with the fact that we have the TD by 9 heading off of some major support levels. If we are to get a bounce in the traditional equity market, it's likely going to occur pretty soon after this, or just not occur at all. Now, moving to one of my other favorite charts, and this one has a much more pronounced bullish divergence, and that's because we actually have come down to that recent low of roughly 13,030 or 13,350. And once again, you can see that very significant bullish divergence with ultimately repeating higher lows as the trend has continued to make lower lows. Even though we're touching the same level here in our current day, you can see the RSI momentum is way higher than what it was back in January of 2022. Also, you have the TD by 9. And if you just look at how these have behaved throughout the previous trend in the last month, we've had buy signal, rally to the moving average, buy signal, rally to the moving average, sell signal, decline to the moving average, and now we're getting a buy signal off of previous support with the bullish divergence and a decent divergence from the moving average. So we'll see if we get kind of a bullish price increase back into potentially the $14,000 level, but ultimately that's what I'm expecting for some indices as well as the NASDAQ. Taking a look at the Qs, I mean, pretty similar story, right? Just very significant divergence, couple buy signals. This one has actually had 4 TD buy nines in the last month, as opposed to the others, which is 3. ARC, very similar place. Very strong divergence as well on a monthly, multi-week time frame, essentially now. And then going back to DXY and oil, I mean, this thing has just been absolutely ripping. And we are coming up on a TD Cell 9 tomorrow on the DXY with a significant divergence from the moving average. We'll see if that one shows some weakness. Of course, it hasn't shown anything yet. So if I was long this, I would not necessarily be looking to exit yet until we show some weakness, because this trend is very strong still. Going towards oil, we're watching this thing decline and contemplating whether or not this could be a potential interim top for oil. I think it's still too early to say, but as you can see, we are bouncing pretty strongly now, just a few days following that TD by 9, and are now back above the 20 smooth moving average. But pretty much a pretty neutral trend in oil as of today. Obviously, the daily close is going to be very important, whether we can hold the $100 level. I think if we get, some more psychological buy pressure above that $100 level, could flip to some really substantial supports. Also, that really depends on a lot of the geopolitical uncertainty we've been seeing, and how long of a grind this ultimate Ukraine war conflict occurs. CCJ, not one that we talk about often, but I really like these uranium plays. These are ones that I am long and looking kind of 3 to 5 years out on, both URA and CCJ. So really seeing some nice bullish price action today, up 4%. But down to Bitcoin, within the last probably 10 minutes since I've started talking, it looks like we've had a nice increase here. As you can see, we hit that TD buy 9 on the 30-minute just before we began streaming, and have ever since gone up about $600 here. So pretty nice move with BTC in the last 14 minutes. And pretty much the same story. It's like it's the same trade between the Nasdaq, the Qs, and Bitcoin. TD buy 9, trying to catch up with the moving average. So it's looking pretty bullish. I think the levels you're going to want to watch for are 42, and especially when the 20 smooth moving average comes right up against that level. So basically where we're staying right now, or what we're looking at in the interim. But Monty, do you have any thoughts on any of those assets, or ETH, or any alternatives you'd like to bring to mind?
Yeah, definitely. And I think you made some really nice points there. I just want to go back over some of those because, looking at where we're at right now with the traditional equity markets, it does feel like we're at a bit of a crossroads here. We're right between, we're right in the middle of this range that's kind of being established in many of these major indices. And that includes Bitcoin as well. But for the Qs, I mean, just looking at this, and you talked about this a little bit, but I mean, we have that critical range at which we were sold into hard on multiple occasions at about 370. And then on the other end, we have that level of support at about 318. We are right in between that level now, right at the mid range. Getting that, TD by 9 tells me that I think we have a slightly higher chance of coming up and retesting this level first, 370. But still, we are establishing a very clear range. And one thing that's been very evident for not just the Qs, not just the NASDAQ, but Bitcoin as well, is how when we retest these bounds of the range, that's where we see tremendous volume step in. When we came down here and retested 318 just a couple weeks ago in the Qs, we saw tremendous bullish volume step in for 4 days in a row. Look at this, positive price action, 4 consecutive days of a rally off the bottom. Buyers stepped in with a lot of conviction at this level. But the same thing can be said here up at the top. We saw some pretty significant sell pressure as the Qs retested 370, and as a result, many speculative assets kind of tumbled. So now that we're kind of establishing this range, we're right in the middle of it, I think you can kind of prepare to trade your Bitcoin position around what we see happening in the Qs and in the NASDAQ. And, if you just look at Bitcoin, you'll see that we are in a very similar spot, being, 45K being the sort of top of the range, with 35K being the middle. Or 35K being the bottom. We are right in the middle here, currently sitting around 41K. So I do like the fact that this upward sloping trend line is being maintained. I do like the fact that the Qs are bouncing as well. That, to me, tells me that in the interim here, we have a higher likelihood of coming up and retesting the tops of these ranges for Bitcoin at 45K, for the Qs at about 370, than we do, coming back down and retesting the lows at about 318. That being said, the day can change very quickly. We're only a few hours into the trading day here so far. So will we be able to continue this momentum? Will we be able to bounce off this 9? I think what the Qs end up doing today will be a deciding factor for how Bitcoin and the alts end up performing. And I think that's pretty evident by the strong correlation we've seen so far. We talked about that Arthur Hayes article, but ultimately I think that right now risk tolerance is being gauged by the treasury yields, which is being reflected into these major indices, which is being reflected into Bitcoin. So I think that just looking at this range and trading along with the Qs is a great way to kind of gauge exactly how strong your risk tolerance should be at any given point in time in the crypto markets. So right now does feel like a very critical day. We're right in the middle of the week, right in the middle of these ranges. So it's going to be interesting to see where we go from here. But I think that what we see in the Qs will kind of dictate what we see in the crypto market for the rest of the day.
Yeah, I'm definitely not a seller at these levels. Looking to add even in the short term or long term as well, just that combination. But yeah, it looks like we're making a run at 41K just about here. But yeah, why don't we hit some more assets? One that's interesting that actually has some news of a mainnet coming up. This is a small cap layer one, but is doing some really interesting things with interoperability, and that has to do with Kava. Um, don't own any right now, just disclosure, but this one is pretty small in terms of an L1. It's kind of like CKB, but I like what it's doing more with the Cosmos ecosystem and linking it to the ETH ecosystem. I think that's going to be very important, not only just for Kava, but as well for the entire Cosmos and Atom ecosystem as well. But essentially, Kava allows or aids in bringing the EVM compatible layer and smart contracts to the Cosmos SDK as it's built on that engine. So, one thing that I think has kept a lot of people out of the Cosmos ecosystem, with just a very minor thing being like needing to have a Kepler wallet or maybe not having the Kepler wallet entirely installed. And then also not allowing developers to directly port their Ethereum virtual machine projects directly to a system like Cosmos. And with Kava, they could actually do that. And I think it will be very beneficial for not just Kava, but also Atom, and could be interesting. But overall, the mainnet for that will launch on May 10th. And there's a little bit more details about the actual launch. So, in terms of like an event-driven trading, and a lot of what people, including many funds, used to trade going back to like 2017 and the 2018 eras, was like you would typically have a lot of bullish price action leading up to a lot of these mainnet launches. And I think we may see something similar out of Kava if price can trend and the market actually holds up collectively here. As of now, haven't really seen anything that exciting, but we are testing critical support, and I'm going to be watching this very carefully to see how, if we bounce, and with velocity, do we bounce from this level? Otherwise, I might just wait and see if we kind of come down a little bit more. Either way, could be an exciting project, and that news leading up to that mainnet launch on May 10th should be interesting and could potentially provide some type of bullish catalyst for that single altcoin. But of course, that's much more contingent on Bitcoin, which is then contingent on the S&P and Nasdaq. So it all goes back to the big pond of liquidity. So
That it does. But I will say Kava is available on Voyager, and they offer strong interest on that as well. I believe 10%. So if you're looking to take a longer term play on this one, then Voyager might be a good place to hold it because they did recently add it, and I believe it's 10% interest. So definitely worth checking out. But I think that's all we got for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, we'll be doing our members only Doge of the day right after this. If you'd like access to that and a whole lot you can check it out at the link below me, marketrebellion.com/crypto or try crypto, excuse me. But please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel on your way out. That's all we got for today.